Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Lists, a little series I'm doing to cover a bunch of broad subjects that interest me. LIST stands for Life is Short, because I always think, even in the grand scheme of things, if life is short, there's still plenty of time to talk about a bunch of dumb or interesting topics. And for today's topic, we're going to be covering mistakes and failures and some interesting realizations I've had recently. I had an example that happened recently, and I thought it was an interesting one to properly understanding for me what failures and mistakes truly are. I was writing a speech for a class, and while I was writing it, I was pretty hesitant to if it was a good speech because I could tell there were some good parts about it, but everything else seemed like it maybe wasn't flowing together, but I was optimistic. A couple days before I had to present, I then showed it off to some people to see if it was any good. And once I actually showed it off and got feedback is when the realization of how it just wasn't a good speech came into fruition. And once I heard people actually talking about it, the common idea is to defend it and try and think of the ideas on why it's still a good speech so I wouldn't have to do any more work. I realized that once I had this idea of, oh yeah, there might be some good parts of the speech, I was falling into the thing of just trying to defend it and making sure that my point still stands and rebuttaling to everything. But after a bit of realization and just seeing how, yeah, I'm admitting that my speech isn't that good in my brain and how other people aren't saying it's that good, why do I have to rebuttal at every point just to make sure this isn't a failure if I could maybe get something better out of it? So once I put my hands up and was like, you know what, I agree with you guys though. This speech isn't really up to par with what I could make. So then I decided to rewrite a speech, but instead actually take the advice. Once I started writing the new one, I got people in the process instantly so that I could stay on the right track and wouldn't veer off to something that would just turn into another speech. And once I was doing that, I realized, man, this is coming together super nice and is making me a lot more happy with that failure of that first speech. And once I realized that, I was like, man, failure is just sometimes necessary. And then that realization got to mistakes and how they are also necessary. And it just came to this idea of just how important failures and mistakes are in properly using them in a good light for me, and realizing that it's a common thing that everyone I feel like should be able to understand to be able to live a life to the fullest and get proper feedback. I would say it's a common thing where if you are getting some feedback, it might feel like you're being attacked. Because it makes a lot of sense when you are working towards something or making something, and then someone gives you advice about maybe changing directions, it can feel like they're trying to be mean in a way of just saying your work isn't good. But a lot of the times in those scenarios, it's just trying to help you not get a failure and trying to learn from it to use other people's advice. Failures and mistakes, like I said, are already a big part in how you can properly learn, but this is where I would say the best learning can come from it, is properly taking in that advice other people can give when you are making something, is to take in their advice to maybe see if you can steer away from that failure or mistake and realize that it might have led to that, or if you just continue with it and realize you maybe didn't do your best work, once you're done with that, you're able to look back and see, that's how that didn't turn out so well, so for next time I can use that in a good light and properly understand. It's not as easy as to just say, oh, make sure to learn from your mistakes and failures, but it's the idea of properly learning from your mistakes and failures and not just throwing them off to the side when they happen. That's the common idea of, let's say you made a mistake, you feel sorry about it, but then you just kind of throw it away and it doesn't really stay in your mind. I would say that's not really the proper way to learn from your mistakes. Otherwise, I would say is to, once you make a mistake, remember it, not in the way where it's at the forefront of your mind, but don't just forget it because you think it never happens again, but just remember that you made the mistake and that you'll learn it for next time. Same with the failures. Don't treat every failure as just a failure. Treat them as a good way to just learn from your mistakes and failures. It's such common advice that parents might give, but at the core, it's some really good, true advice that everyone can benefit from, because if you're not learning from your mistakes and failures, what's going to happen? They're bound to happen again. And once they keep happening and happening, it gets to a point where you're just so fed up with it, it can just make you in a distraught position. So the best way to make sure that never happens is to look at every single mistake and every single failure and trying to dissect them in a way where you're not necessarily looking at all the negatives, but you're looking at the neutral and the positives to see what type of learning things you can take away from them. I know a big pet peeve of mine has always been when I make a mistake or when I fail, people digging it into my head that I did that mistake or did that failure. But I feel like at that core, it's really trying to understand how most people are just trying to help, and it's not necessarily about how everyone is attacking you, but it's about how sometimes this most nonchalant advice can be the most important to put you in the right direction. If maybe someone made a comment on your attitude just in a slight way, you can maybe think about being like, maybe I have been a lot more angry recently. Or maybe a thing about like, I don't really like this part of your written piece could make you rewrite the whole last part because you realized, oh yeah, that doesn't really make sense with the start. Small things like that is really where it ends up, to where you don't have to necessarily make a bunch of big mistakes or failures, but you're learning from the small ones, and if big mistakes or failures happen, you can learn from them as well, and once you learn properly from them, then you're able to take those in for next time and make sure that you're able to make good products and be a good person. If I could give any advice, it would really just to be make sure to have an open mind all the time. It's hard to want to get advice and hear criticism, but it's not criticism that you should be looking for, it's constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is a word that is thrown around in all types of schooling and can get quite repetitive. I definitely know that. But at the core, constructive criticism is the best way to really get into something and properly learn from it. You can't just say I'm going to learn from mistakes or failures without action behind it. So getting constructive criticism from one of those ideas is exactly where you can properly learn from them. Take the constructive criticism, ask people to give you constructive criticism. If it seems just like regular criticism, it probably isn't. It's just the other person being honest and wanting to be honest with you so your product can turn out the best. In the end, it doesn't have to be a sort of loop-de-loop of just having a bunch of issues and trying to go through them and failing and maybe getting some good out of them. It's just trying to be a bit self-aware about when stuff happens, just thinking a bit more about it, and if someone talks about it in a bad manner, maybe just see if they're trying to get any good light for you to make sure that you can make something you're happy of. Because in the end of the day, making a good product that you're proud of is the real kicker in just making yourself happy. Anyways, that's going to be all for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.